I'm doing this video on request tonight. Some people had posted some stuff on Facebook about anxiety, and I sort of chimed in and said I was thinking about doing a live stream on that. So this is my first chance getting to talk to you all about something other than the Bible, which, don't get me wrong, I love the Word of God and I love talking and teaching about it, but I am excited about the opportunity to get to talk about something else, some other subjects that are very important. And so we're going to talk about anxiety from a mental health standpoint, and where does it come from, and why is it so prevalent in society nowadays, and so many people have it in America especially. Before I get started, when you do something like this, you want to present your sources, because I could be accused of either plagiarism in the future, or I could be accused of just making up the stuff off the top of my head. So that's my disclaimer. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy who likes to read a lot. And so this is a bit of an old book. It's from 1989, but it's called Unlocking the Secrets of Your Childhood Memories. So I would begin by recommending that as a good read. Now, to show you all what a dork I am, when Beth and I sometimes we'll go to the thrift store, and I'll go straight to the books section. And so you got college students who, once they graduate, they give their books away to the Goodwill. And so to me, like, one of those students would pay like $500 for one of their textbooks for their graduate degree, and I get it for like $2.50. So I've got a lot of textbooks, which is where you can get really great information. So I've got some biology textbooks, I've got some science textbooks, and I've actually got a collection of, if you were in school to get a psychology degree, these are the kind of books you would have. So I've got Psychology, the 4th edition by Pearson. I've got Contemporary Psychotherapies for a Diverse World. And I've also got the Foundations of Physiological Psychology. And the only reason, again, that I'm putting that out there is I just want to show you all that I'm not just making this stuff up. This is really credible information I'm presenting tonight from experts, not necessarily from me. So what is anxiety? Where does it come from? Why is it so prevalent today? Again, there's something very important about us as human beings, and when you understand this, it'll help understand why there's so much mental illness in society today. And it's a very important guiding principle to understand this. And what it is the fact that humans have built wonderful things. We've built a complex society. We built civilization. And, you can just go to the bathroom and turn the water on and the water will come out. And, we've got refrigeration and ways to preserve our food. We've got, cities. We've just got all these things. But our minds haven't really changed. Like the anatomy of our brains is still pretty much the same. And when we come into the world, we're genetically programmed to be hunter-gatherers. We're still of the mindset of tribal people. And it's been shown, there's been scientific studies that have demonstrated that if you have a social group of less than 200, you're going to succeed very greatly. But once you get past about 200 or more, that social group is doomed to failure eventually. That's why empires eventually collapse. That's why, cities and nations don't last forever. That's why people who grow up in city environments do more poorly than people who grow up in small town environments. So the bigger your social group, the less well you're going to do in the long run. And so, and the reason for that is simple, that we're still programmed to be tribal people, and so if you think about what does it mean to be tribal, you go back to, living in the wilderness, like on the plains of Africa. What do they have to worry about? They have to worry about drought. They have to worry about shelter. They have to worry about food and survival, not getting eaten by predators. And those basic traits are still wired into our brains. Our brains, when we come into the world, are developed that it's literally a constant battle for survival. But now the problem is we don't live under a constant battle for survival. Not anymore. We've built civilization. We have wonderful health care. We have an abundance of food, but that doesn't really change the way we're structured, in our minds. And so the problem with that is in recent times in American history, only the past 100 years or so, we've had an economic boom. Starting, I guess, really at the end of World War II, we had the economic boom that made America the global dominant superpower, which is great, and it's wonderful. And man, we have an economy, we have an abundance, the kind of abundance we don't really have in other parts of the world. But the problem is, again, children still come into the world with those basic fears. And so I'm not singling any one person out as a parent. And I'm not going to blame my own parents. This is kind of just our mindset collectively as Americans, as we think, well, our kids have it all. They have shelter. They have a nice big house to grow up in. They have all the things that our great-great-great-grandparents that toiled on the farms didn't have, during harsher years. And so, kids don't have to worry about being eaten by predators. They don't have to worry about, dying of terrible diseases. They don't have to worry about that stuff. They got video games, and they've got just all the toys they could ever hope to play with. They've got all the entertainment options. But the problem is we get kind of slack in realizing the basic needs of our children. So what children need basically is lots of love, lots of attention, and a two-parent household. And, you can provide them with the shelter, you can provide them with the house, you can provide them with all these things, but if you don't provide them with the basic necessities of love and affection and lots of attention, they're going to feel like they're in danger because their brains are wired that way. And they're going to feel like, so if you go back to the wilderness, like I said, you go back to our ancestors that were struggling for survival, you might be taken and eaten by a lion at night, but your parents were there to protect you. And the social group was there to protect you. That's why tribes were so important. That's why we, as humans, we're social creatures. We like to gather together in groups. We don't like to be alone. When you're alone, your mind, your nervous system actually responds like it's being tortured because it's a survival mechanism. Our brains are designed to associate loneliness with being exposed to the elements. And so how is our brain hardwired exactly? Well, we have a special organ right behind our eyes, right in the deepest central part of our brain. It's called the amygdala. And amygdala is an old word, Assyrian word for almond, because it's an almond-shaped organ. And so the amygdala is responsible for your fight or flight mode. It's responsible for how you process danger. And it's literally the first thing, when any information goes through your eyes, it's the first thing that processes that information. And it happens so quickly, we don't even realize it's happening. But so whenever we see a new thing, the first thing our brain is designed is to determine whether it's safe or whether it's dangerous, whether it could kill us and eat us or whether it's safe to approach. And so then the information passes from that, and then the upper part of our brain, that's called the cerebral cortex, that's where we process logic and reason. That's where we think. That's where we do math and, put tools together and things like that. Very important for survival. And so the reason why the amygdala, information has to pass through the amygdala first and before it can get to the central cortex is because that's a survival mechanism. That's a very useful survival trait because when we see something, going back to our wilderness ancestors, primeval days, it's back in the early Holocene era, before the Ice Age. If you saw a lion at a distance, you didn't want to think about what it was. You just wanted to react quickly. And that way you could get a running head start before it started to chase you to eat you. So that's why the amygdala is right where it is. So the problem is when children come into the world, they need a healthy amount of love, attention, and affection from their parents. They also need to feel like they fit into a strong social group, that they're surrounded by a family, that they're surrounded by a tribe. And that will help their amygdala develop normally so it can process danger normally. And it also help their cerebral cortex. Those two things need to develop normally. So if children are not being loved by their parents, their amygdala doesn't develop right. It becomes hypersensitive because everything is danger. Like you think about how messed up it would be, because your parents are supposed to be, let me move the phone a little bit because I think the lighting's drowning out my face there. Your parents are supposed to be your protectors, and if your parents don't love you or pay you enough attention properly, then the protector actually becomes the thing to be afraid of, and that really warps a child's mind. If they're cussed at, or if they're beaten by their parents, or what have you, or if they're neglected, it's actually just as bad. It's been shown that what's damaging for children is that it's just as terrible if you neglect the child as if you beat them. Like, a parent could just completely ignore their child all their life and say, well, I never beat him. I was a better parent than some. And really they weren't, because it's just as bad to neglect the child as it is to beat them or hurt them. And on the other hand, it's also true that if you give children a mixture, like, if sometimes you're loving to your child and you just hold them and show them affection and make them feel safe, but then sometimes you beat them and scream at them and you cuss them, that's actually worse than just hating them and beating them and screaming at them all the time. I mean, because it's so confusing that it turns the child's brain into mush. They don't know how to process that. So we need a healthy level as children growing up of love, attention, but also to feel like we're in a strong social group. And so that's where bullying comes in. And bullying is just, it is so bad in society nowadays. But bullying comes from that same mammalian program. Like, all mammals do this. It's something that we all have in common, is that we have litters. So we don't just have one child. We usually have a brood of children. And there's a tendency towards hierarchy. Like, the siblings will start battling for dominance, and you'll have that one that reaches the top, and then the others that will, be kind of pushed on the bottom. Well, the runt of the litter is the one that is at the very, very bottom. And because runts don't have strong genes, they're weak, they're perceived as being unhealthy for the species. Like, it'll be bad for the species for this runt to stay and pass down its weak genes into the future. So there's a tendency of the siblings to gang up on that and attack it and beat it and then shove it out so it'll be eaten by the predators. And then, the runt of the litter will be eaten, and that'll save so it promotes the stronger genes of the dominant of the brood. And so there's a tendency of that in all mammals, including us. And we have a tendency to do that as well. That's where bullying comes from. Because when you put children in a social setting, like at school or in a daycare or whatever, they automatically gravitate towards that. And they look at who's the weakest of the brood. And, their programming starts to tell them, attack, 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 beat them down, push them down, remind them of their place on the hierarchy. And so we're kind of wired to do that. And we have to really fight to keep that from happening, because bullying really messes children up just about as badly as being sexually abused by an adult, or by being unloved or beaten or neglected by their families, or by their parents, or by an adult. Because bullying, again, so the source of all anxiety is that it's you don't feel safe, and there's something in your mind, the mechanisms of your brain, that is telling that you're in danger, that you're exposed to the elements, that you could be killed and eaten by predators, even if you're not in any danger. So when children are growing up in this kind of a situation, their nervous system doesn't develop properly. And they're exposed. They'll grow up with a permanent sense of feeling exposed to predators and an inability to process danger, right? So their amygdala is hypersensitive and too big and overdeveloped, and their cerebral cortex is underdeveloped. And so they'll perceive everything as a danger, and they'll overreact to everything. So from this, you get things like obsessive compulsive disorder. And OCD is actually a form of anxiety. So if you think about what anxiety is, what is the actual feeling? It's the feeling that you're in danger, that you're going to die. It's your brain actually telling you that you are going to die. And it starts kicking in the survival mechanisms in your body. So, like, just above our kidneys, we have a special gland called the renal gland that releases adrenaline. And that's there to help us survive in the wilderness setting. So when you're when that gland and when it goes off and starts releasing adrenaline, it makes you energetic, it makes you want to run because it's there to help you run, to outrun a lion or anything like that, a wolf, something that could kill you and eat you, run from danger. But the problem is with anxiety is that your mind doesn't know when it's actually in danger or not. So, you'll just be sitting there completely safe, completely not in any harm's way whatsoever. But again, your brain, which didn't develop properly, will start sending signals. We're in danger, we're going to die, we're going to die. And then your adrenal glands will start going, and you'll start just getting this feeling like, your brain is actually trying to tell you to get up and run and to escape being eaten by wolves and predators. It traces all the way back to our primitive, pre-civilized ancestors. It's how they survived. But again, that deadly thing is that you're not actually in any danger, and you can't figure out why you're feeling this way. And so I guess that's part of why I'm doing this live stream. I want to help people understand why they feel the way that they do when they are suffering from anxiety attacks. And so if you think about every form of anxiety that we see that's common in the United States. So, for example, like I said, obsessive compulsive disorder. OCD is your brain telling you that you're going to die because of something that actually poses no threat to you. So you'll have the person that, for example, has to have the rug straight perfectly. And you see how their eyes go crazy, and they're like, I got to straighten the rug. I got to get it absolutely perfect. Because their mind is actually telling them if they don't get that, and you can try to reason with them. You can say, it's okay if the rug isn't straight. It's not going to hurt you if the rug isn't perfectly straight, but they don't listen to you. It's like it goes in one ear and out the other. It's because their brain is telling them that they are going to die if they don't straighten the rug. They have the inability to process danger. And usually it is a sign that somewhere deep down inside there's some terrible trauma from the past, and it may be something they don't even remember anymore. Like, and I'll use myself as an example here because I've struggled with anxiety all my life, and that's why this is such an important issue to me. So like when I was very, very young, some of my earliest memories are like going to preschool and the other kids not letting me play with them, and then like you'd see a bunch of kids playing with their toys, and I'd go and try to get into the group, and, I can remember them saying no and, like telling me to get lost, and it would make me cry. And, it seems stupid because I'm 35 years old now. Like, why would I still be upset? But something that happens to you that young of an age, it's like a ripple. Like, as you grow older, it just grows and magnifies. It doesn't actually shrink or dissipate with time like we think. It grows. And so, like all my life, I struggled with fitting in. I've always had difficulty. Like, man, I was absolutely lost in the school system after that. Like from kindergarten through elementary school, through middle school, through high school, I just remember being bullied, and I can remember having trouble fitting in. And some of my earliest memories, even going back to like when I was still in preschool, some of my earliest memories are things like compulsive picking. So like, I would start picking nervously at this little flap of skin on the front of my lip right here until it would bleed. And my parents would be like screaming at me, stop, quit doing that. You're going to damage yourself. You're going to hurt yourself. Or later I developed this one where I would kind of twist at my hair, and I would twist it so much that eventually it would kind of start to rip out, and I developed a bald spot right here. But see, the children don't really know what's going on, so they don't realize, that these are anxiety symptoms. So your children are always trying to signal to you that, they're feeling anxious, and they'll do it in different ways. And some of the ways they do it, you can actually see, like, you can use it as a meter, like how abused or how neglected is this child, how intense is the anxiety that they do, like, or how intense is their anxiety? How intense is the action that they commit as their coping mechanisms against this anxiety? So, for example, let's say children who act out. So you have those kids at school that are just always bad. They're always getting bad grades. They're always getting sent to the principal's office, and they're always acting out. And the teacher is frustrated with them, and just odds are that's a sign that at home that child's parents aren't paying them any attention. Like they're completely unloved. And, it could be that the parents do everything. They go through the motions. Like they, they cook the food, they go to work, they feed the child, and that's it. But they're not, taking time with them, playing with them, paying them attention, spending bonding time together, building those strong bonds with adults that children need. And so the child is starved for attention, and he's looking for that elsewhere. So children will learn that negative attention is better than no attention. So they will, when they act out at school, what they're doing is they're trying to get attention that their parents aren't paying them enough at home. And so, as a parent, you have to watch things like that. And another one, we could go to the nighttime terrors, for example. And this is one I struggled with as a child. And, it's fascinating how, like I said earlier, everything that we do can be traced back to, our pre-civilized ancestors living in their tribes out in the wilderness. And that's how their brains were wired. So, you can have a child and he's growing up in a perfectly safe household. He's got both his parents, and he's got siblings, so he's got nothing to be afraid of. But, what do children have? They're afraid of the dark at night. So they'll have trouble sleeping, and they'll have panic attacks because they're convinced that there are monsters in the closet or monsters under the bed, or, things that will grab them and eat them in the middle of the night, ghosts hiding in their curtains. And what that's coming from, it's something very deep in the brain. It's that fear of being eaten by predators at night that our ancestors had to deal with. It's being manifested, it's an ancient primeval thing, but it's being manifested in modern times in adulthood. Callie said adults do the same thing, and she's right. And, we're going over several examples here. So, but what I'm saying is that your child is trying to signal to you, I don't feel safe at night. So, loving your children, hugging them, giving them lots of affection, paying lots of attention, those are very important to keep those things in check. And so, your children are trying to send you signals. They're suffering with anxiety, and it's perfectly natural for them. So there may not be any actual hyenas or wolves or lions that are going to grab them in the middle of the night, but their brains will actually invent predators, and that's what the monsters are. They're psychological modern manifestations of those, primal fears of being eaten in the middle of the night that we still struggle with. And, into adulthood, like I said, these things that happen as children, they don't go away when we grow up. They actually get worse. They intensify and they magnify as our nervous systems develop. So that's why, when children or adults who may have struggled with those nighttime terrors will struggle with insomnia as an adult. They'll have trouble sleeping, and they can't figure out why, and they'll lay awake and try to go to sleep, and they'll struggle with those terrible anxiety attacks. And that's why, it can be traced back to deeper traumas. And some of these are just so pernicious. Like, the parent may not realize that they did anything wrong. And, that's why we just need to be well informed about these things. So when children are growing up and they're not being properly loved and feeling nurtured correctly, it can do irreversible damage to their nervous system. So you have to understand how the nervous system works. As it's growing and developing, we have these cells that go throughout our nerves. They're called neurons, and these neurons need to have a correct amount of, so there's a chemical, and it makes you feel good. It's called dopamine. So a healthy level of dopamine has to run from one nerve cell to the next for the nervous system to be developed properly. And so traumatic experiences like either being sexually abused or being, unloved or beaten by a parent or whatever the child may have dealt with, being bullied at school, as they're growing up, their nervous systems don't develop properly. And so they're not getting the correct amount of dopamine transferring from one neuron to the next. And what will end up happening is, so let's say you have a 100% level of dopamine flowing through your nervous system. That neurochemical is very important, but if you don't develop properly, you won't have that 100% level. You may have only a 30% level of dopamine. And so that's why, those children in adulthood just are always antsy and always on edge and just always shaking and always afraid of everything or constantly struggling with those feelings. And so what they do is then they turn to addictions, because what addictions do, and it doesn't matter what the addiction is. Now, Drugs do this literally, but, the other addictions, alcohol does it, cigarettes do it, any form of nicotine, pornography does it, sex does it, anything that can be an addiction, gambling does it. What that does is it generates your heart rate going up, and then dopamine levels start going through your system. Now, this person is supposed to have a 100% level of dopamine flowing through their nervous system, but let's say their whole life they've been used to only having a 30% level. So the addiction that they have will raise the dopamine levels to, say, 80%. And that's not 100%. It's not quite there, but that's the closest to normal that they've ever felt. For the first time, they've felt like they have a healthy functioning nervous system. And the problem is that the addiction, when they commit the addictive act, when it wears off, the dopamine level crashes. Not only does it crash, it actually goes to lower than it was before. So whereas they were functioning at 30% levels, now it only goes down to 25%. And so now they feel worse than they did. So what do? They go back to the addictive behavior. They go back to the gambling and the alcohol and the pornography and the drugs, except next time that high won't ever get as big as the first one. So their nervous system won't go up to 80%. It'll only go up to 75%. And they'll never get that first high again. That's what's so pernicious about addictive behaviors. And so they're constantly going back. And each time they do this, they're doing more damage to their nervous system. So every time they go back to the drug of choice, their nervous system now crashes from 30% to 25 to only 20%. And each time they have to keep going back to that drug, and the high that they get from the drug will never get back to 80%. It may only go up to 60% now. And it's just that constant, desperate chase for the feeling of being normal, of just feeling healthy and feeling functioning. And so we need love, we need affection, we need to feel like we belong in a strong social setting. These are basic survival things that humans need. I mean, they're just about as important as food, water, and shelter, because they come from a time when we had to worry about food, water, and shelter. And, famine and disease and drought were realities, things that humans had to worry about. And those basic inner fears are still inside of us, and they manifest themselves in modern society in the form of anxiety. So that was a brief rundown of anxiety, about where it comes from. Now, the real question is, what do we do about it? And that doesn't have an easy answer. Like everybody has different solutions, because everybody, the wiring in everyone's brain is different. And so the chemistry of our brains and our nervous systems is all different. And, no one solution will fit all. But I'll say, people will look to the things that they didn't get as children. They'll look to those feelings as adults. And I've noticed something that, if you look at every compulsive behavior, really, even though they all seem strange, they all actually have to do with survival in some way, shape, or form. So if you've got an obsessive compulsive behavior towards locking your doors at night, for example, and you go back and you lock the doors, you make sure you double, triple, quadruple check that those doors are locked, and you still can't sleep because you're still afraid that the doors may not be locked. What does locking doors symbolize to you? What does it signify? It signifies survival. It signifies keeping intruders out, a rival tribe or a lion or a tiger. You still have that basic fear that our ancestors had to deal with, still programmed in our minds. And so let's look at other examples. For example, obesity. What is obesity? It's overeating. It's eating too much. And the reason why people who are obese eat so much is because, again, you go back to that traumatic childhood experiences. Obesity isn't as genetic as we think it is, even though a lot of people who struggle with it have obese parents, but really it's more of the cycle of addiction and anxiety that's being handed down from generation to generation. That really has a lot more to do with it. So the reason you're overeating is because what do you need to do to survive? To eat. It's like when you were growing up, something was making you feel unsafe, and that triggered our ancestors' primal memories of having to worry about famine and starvation. So you're overcompensating. Something in your brain is telling you got to eat to survive. You got to keep eating. You got to keep eating. You got to keep eating. And yeah, you're eating to deal with the pain, but the source of that pain is the fear of famine, of starvation. And you look at somebody who weighs up to 300 pounds. You're like, they couldn't possibly starve. But if you ask them, Why do you keep eating so much? Because I'm hungry. And not only are they hungry, but you can see the look in their eyes, that anxious look. Their eyes get big and they start acting like they're going to die if they don't eat something. And you can actually sum up, like, hoarding is another behavior. So what is hoarding? It's the collection of resources. Then that's another thing. Our ancestors had to constantly go out and hunt and gather as many resources as they could to survive. It's something we're programmed to do in our minds. And so, like, even if there's no chance that you're ever going to run out of resources that you need, still they go out and collect more. Still they go out and collect more until their whole house is full. And they've got multiple houses. They got every room in the house is stacked to the ceiling with junk, with useless garbage. They've got outbuildings filled with junk stacked to the ceiling. Hoarding, what is it? It's about gathering resources. So the vast majority of obsessive compulsive behavior involves survival in some way, shape, or form. So again, getting back to the solutions, psychotherapy is incredibly important because if you're struggling with that anxiety, then what a good therapist will do is they will force you to confront that fear. So they'll take, and this is called cognitive therapy. So for example, you take something from a hoarder and you watch them have an anxiety attack, but instead of caving to the anxiety attack, which is what they have always done their entire life, you let them actually get through it. And it's unbearably painful because their body is just, their mind is signaling, you're going to die because somebody took your trinket or, just this useless junk they have stacked up in their house. Take one item away from them and let them have the panic attack, but don't give it back to them. And eventually the panic attack, the anxiety, it can't last forever. And eventually it'll wear off. And then they can start to learn, it's sort of like retraining your brain and trying to redevelop your nervous system to as healthy as it can be to say, I don't need all this useless junk to survive. I won't die without it. Or again, going back to the compulsive behaviors, locking your doors, like show someone that, or let someone get through a whole night and let them embrace instead of run from the anxiety and the panic attack. And it'll be really painful and difficult, but in the long run, it will help. In the long run, it will help them get better. That's why they say facing your fears is the best way to get over your fears. And that's true. And it's very difficult sometimes for us to face, but, it is what it is. It's like you kind of can't help the past, but you can help the future. And you can do things better for your future. And so, like, if you struggled with, being unloved, being abused, being neglected, whatever, as a child, we so badly, and this is just such a disaster, for humans, is that we really, really tend to hand those things down. And so, like, even though we swear we're never going to do that to our children, we tend to do that. And so we need therapy behaviors and we need self-awareness to help us, to retrain our brains not to commit the same mistakes that our parents and grandparents and, whoever else did going back, to not let the cycles of abuse and neglect go down and be handed down over and over again. So one of the best things you can do to help your own anxiety is actually not make the same mistakes, but, love your children and surround yourself with a strong social order, with a strong family, with loving children and strong familial bonds. And you can replace the family that you didn't have as a child as an adult, but at the same time, you have to be very careful not to make those same mistakes because, like, if you were unloved and abused by your parents as a child, and if you don't love and abuse your children, they're going to end up neglecting you when they become adults. And then you're going to be alone in your senior years, just like you were in your childhood years. So the beginning and end of your lives will be mirror reflections of one another. And so, like I said, there's no real easy solution, but there are important life principles, guiding principles that we need to help us get through that. So I'm going to wrap it up there. We've been talking for about 40 minutes now. So those of you who just tuned in recently, you're coming in at the tail end of it. I started the broadcast at 7, but I do encourage you to go back and watch it again from the beginning. Thank you all for tuning in. Like I said, I would like to do more of these. Mental health is a really important subject to me, trying to do what I can to sort of help alleviate all the anxiety going on in the world and in America today. But this is my first time really getting to talk to you all about something other than the Bible or biblical lessons. So there's a whole host of different subjects we can talk about: mental health or science or history or philosophy, whatever else y'all want to talk about. So anyway, well, I'll let y'all know if I decide to do another one. So thanks again for tuning in.